Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. On today's show, later I'll be talking to Nick Kollerstrom about the protocols of Zion and the controversy surrounding their authenticity. But before that, I'd like to welcome back a familiar face who is going to update us on a few issues, and we will also discuss the feedback I've had from the show we made about Wikileaks and Julian Assange. So from the man in the shitty brown suit to the man in the shitty blue fleece, welcome back, Andrew Johnson.
Thanks for inviting me back, Richard. Here we are again.
So, where's the shitty blue fleece?
Well, you know, I was considering a ceremonial burning after the various, ping-ponging of comments, and all I will say is that people can't see what trousers I've got on. So
Right, okay. We'll not go into that. All right then, Andrew. So you want to start us off with some 9/11 information because you went over to the United States recently to visit Dr. Judy Wood. So just tell us about that.
Right. So we've just passed the 16th anniversary of the events, and what had happened was, as I was saying to you, I'd found out there was going to be an eclipse in 2017, a total solar eclipse across North America. So I'd mentioned this to Dr. Wood, and it turns out that the path of the totality went right over her house. So we'd sort of hatched this plan that we would meet up, and that's what we did. So we watched the eclipse, and we got a good view of that, thankfully. There was, for some people, quite near us that were clouded out, but we did get a very good view of the eclipse. And one might read something into the fact that this eclipse did go right over her house. You know, that's really unusual. It's a very small chance of that happening anywhere in a given place on the Earth, because the path is only about 60 or 70 miles wide. So we did record an interview when we stayed in this house, and I've posted that on my YouTube channel. I did have some technical problems when I was recording this, but we went through some questions and issues that come up when we're discussing 9/11, and people that are interested in this and interested in sort of just listening to the latest that Dr. Wood has got to say will find that interview on my YouTube channel. We did also mention another author, another figure who's written about 9/11 and talked about 9/11, and this is Joseph P. Farrell. We discussed him as well in this video, so people can watch that if they want. I then also went to New York and I visited the World Trade Center site, and I took a few pictures there. That site is almost, well, I wouldn't say in lockdown, but they have, for example, put signs up saying that you shouldn't be distributing leaflets, you shouldn't use a bullhorn, you shouldn't make any protests there, and so forth. And if you want to go to this memorial museum and get fed a lot of propaganda, you'll pay $24 currently to 2017 for the privilege of having that happen. And of course they've got these little stalls selling various books, none of which of course are going to tell you the truth of how those towers came to disappear.
Right. And if you want to know the truth about 9/11 and you want to know what happened, you can get this book, Where Did the Towers Go, by Dr. Judy Wood. It's available from my website, cheaper than you'll get it on Amazon. And one aspect of 9/11 that we're just going to touch on today is Hurricane Erin. Because what a lot of people don't realise is on the morning of 9/11 there was a very potentially dangerous hurricane that had developed sort of off the southeast coast of Florida and was working its way towards New York. So just tell us about Hurricane Erin and what the significance of that may have been.
Yes, I mean this is very, very important that people know about this because of the path of it, which, as you said, it was travelling in a straight line for 4 days up from the Atlantic, and it was given a name on September the 1st, and then it travelled over to Bermuda, did a bit of damage at Bermuda, and then went in a straight line for 4 days, and it was closest to New York City at 8 o'clock in the morning, just before the events unfolded. The storm was at its widest extent, and then on the 12th of September it made a right-hand turn and headed out towards Newfoundland, after these events had unfolded. And this is all documented quite meticulously in Dr. Wood's book, and there's some very peculiar things about Erin. It was only reported a little bit on the morning of 9/11. They claimed that they knew where it was going to go because there was a cold front sweeping across in North America. But even before that, it was never reported as a risk, such as these more recent hurricanes have been, with Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Harvey, which devastated parts of Houston
So what you're saying is we should have seen mass media warnings about this hurricane which was building up, and there was very little.
Very little. In fact, somebody emailed me the other day saying that they tracked the weather. They were on Long Island and they were very interested in the weather from an early age. And I think they would do surfing. They went surfing near Long Island, and they didn't know about this hurricane, but they were watching the weather broadcasts, regularly around that time, and they hadn't heard of it.
And for those who aren't quite in line with what we're talking about, the Twin Towers were turned to dust in situ. They didn't collapse, they didn't burn up, they didn't fall to the ground. They were turned to dust in midair, which we can only assume was by some sort of advanced technology in the hands of someone. We know that hurricanes have associated with them an electric field. So just tell us about the electric field that is associated with hurricanes.
Right, and of course we've discussed this in other Rich Planet shows, and you've covered it in your tours and things to some extent, and it's covered in depth in Where Did the Towers Go. So that's the best place to get the information. But basically, with a hurricane, you've got an electrical static field, electrostatic field basically associated with a storm system, with a large storm system, and it appears that this was somehow employed in the system which was used to destroy the World Trade Center. In other words, they mixed together, probably microwaves, they mixed together electrostatic field of the hurricane, and along with utilizing certain properties of the Earth's magnetic field. And the reason for me saying this is all documented in the book and in the videos about that. And that is why we know it was an energy weapon. It was using energy to change matter into something else. And there are many other factors that come out of that which prove that that's what happened.
Right. Now, that said, we can assume then that the hurricane was artificially generated somehow.
Well, we don't know if it was artificially generated. It may have been artificially manipulated, in other words, to make it last longer or to increase its strength at certain times. For example, we could suggest that if the storm has an associated electrical system, with it, then if you were able to actually somehow manipulate that electrical field around the hurricane, could you change how the hurricane behaved? If you had some other technology, for example, on a elsewhere that could change it.
Right. So does Dr. Wood propose how that might be done? Is it using low frequency standing waves, or how are they affecting the performance or the characteristics of a hurricane, do you think? Is there any theories on that?
Well, I don't think that's really covered in the Where Did the Towers Go book particularly. I think there might be some clues as to how it was done based on how the hurricane changed over the few days that it was changing, in response to, or in relation to, perhaps I should say, the events of 9/11. But we don't really know exactly what the technology was, just that there was a technology in operation, and it destroyed the towers. And whether that created the hurricane or whether it just steered it, or we don't really know exactly whether it was created or whether it was just steered. But if you look at the timing of the events and the timing of weather changes, which is bringing on to the next one, specifically the weather changes, it is coincident with the events of 9/11. You cannot dispute that, however it was done.
Right. So you think that the component that the hurricane provided was an electrostatic field,
right,
that was needed.
Right, and this is why we've said that, is because that's what John Hutchison was doing in his research experiments, which produced similar effects to those seen on 9/11. Again, that's all in the Where Did the Towers Go book, and we've discussed it before on Rich Planet and on some of the other videos that Dr. Wood has given.
Now, in the mid-1970s, the United Nations brought in rules for nations against using weather modification for hostile purposes.
That's right.
It's actually still okay to use weather modification for peaceful purpose, such as to irrigate fields or what have you. So there is no doubt, no one can question that weather modification technology exists. It's existed since at least the 1970s or 1960s. And you think it was being applied in some way on 9/11.
I think the evidence for that is pretty clear because of the timing, yeah. And as you say, there are disclosed projects using weather modification, which we've probably mentioned once or twice on Rich Planet before. And you can read about these, such as Project Popeye is one, and Project Storm Fury. So yes, there are disclosed projects that have been set up to modify the weather, but both of those projects essentially use what's called cloud seeding, which is where you put some type of chemical or additive into the storm system, typically to modify how it behaves.
Right. And you think there's far more sophisticated methods other than cloud seeding which can be used to modify the weather?
Absolutely, and they use some type of energy system or changes in energy, or they're manipulating the energy in the atmosphere by some method.
That brings us on to the next subject we're going to talk about, which is covered in your new book, all about the phenomenon known as climate change.
Right, so I've put together this book really, and this essentially started as a booklet a few years ago that I think quite a few people have taken copies of, and I call that Reinvestigating Climate Change. And I've essentially expanded that booklet into this book, which is, you can get, I've made it available as a PDF download, so people can download the thing as a PDF if they want.
Is that free?
Yes, it's a free PDF.
A free PDF if you want to read it as PDF.
Right.
Or you can get it, well, we're going to put some on my website, or they can get it from other websites.
It's not going to be on Amazon. It's already on Amazon, and you even have to record this. But basically what my objective in putting this book together was to bring together some of what we've just talked about, in other words, the Hurricane Erin evidence, and also just explain how they've promoted the anthropogenic global warming myth, which it is a myth, and it's become like a religion. So I analysed that and how people argue against it in the mainstream, say, yes, it is, man-made, no, it isn't, and all of that. And you get into this Hegelian dialectic. So I've put that in there. I've also put in about changes in the solar system, which have been happening for the last sort of 40 years. And these have all been measured by different astronomers, people within NASA. NASA, of course, are a big supporter of the anthropogenic global warming myth. Talk about that. And they also mention where this idea of global warming appears to have come from, which is basically the Club of Rome. That's in there. And then I talk about Agenda 21, and I mentioned that if people really do want to stop the environmental damage, then we need to have the free energy technology in general usage. We can't have that until people accept that that technology is already being weaponized.
So the fundamental argument which comes out of the book at the end of it all is, look, let's just say the planet was getting slightly warmer due to, let's say, carbon dioxide, right? Even though, as far as I'm aware, that's not proven. Even if that was true, they've got all of this technology that they've been kept hidden for years and years that could easily rectify it like that.
Exactly, and I mean that's essentially what I'm trying to get people to look at.
So it's a phony argument, you're saying. It doesn't matter. That argument doesn't matter. It's a phony bone of contention if you're involved in arguing whether carbon dioxide causes climate change. It's a phony argument.
Yes.
And they want you in that argument so that you are then obeying their laws of control at Agenda 21, or the measures that they want to bring in.
And also, it factors in the chemtrail issue because, we've had whole programs that we've done on that in the past, and I've got a summary of all the sort of chemtrail-related research in there. And I did turn out one or two interesting things while I was finalising the book. And I hope that my objective, again, is that people that are interested in the climate change issue and do want to argue about it will read this and think, maybe I need to study this a bit more closely and think about this a bit more.
Yeah. Maybe they need to be arguing about something else.
Yes.
Like, let's release this technology that they've had for donkeys, which can manipulate the weather and can give us, well, I wouldn't say free energy, but energy at a vastly reduced economic price than we currently pay.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's a whole set of arguments like that which come out of the evidence which I've put in that book. So I do encourage people to try and read it and share it with those that are interested. We get bombarded with this every day. The climate change nonsense. We're bombarded with it almost 24/7 now. So,
Stephen Hawking. Yeah. All right. On to another fake hero, Julian Assange. Now, we did a program a few months ago now, all about WikiLeaks and Assange, exposing some information about him and his supposed organisation. If you want to watch it, I suggest you watch it if you're going to watch this update that we're about to give. You really need to see that first to understand what we're about to update you on. And I'll put the link on the screen there. People can go and watch that. So the first thing that people contacted me on about that program was the Apple operating system, because we mentioned in that, we suggested that we didn't think that Apple developed their operating system using open source method, and it turns out that they did. So that's a correction that we want to make.
Okay.
So Apple is based on this operating system called Darwin, which was developed under open source rules. Assange claims to have contributed in some point to some of the modules. Now, I did have a look at some of those modules, and there are authors' names in the software, in the source code. Now, I'm not aware of Julian Assange's name being in any of those modules. If anyone can find one and send us it and show that Julian Assange actually was involved in writing any of this source code, send us it, and then we'll admit, yeah, he was involved. Okay, so that's that one dealt with. So I'm just going to read verbatim some viewers' comments, because we had a lot of feedback on that show, some of them very useful. Let's first touch on the whole issue of Ecuador and the Ecuadorian embassy. Ecuador, who was supposedly giving Julian Assange refuge. This viewer says, very good show on Assange. The country of Ecuador has been run by the CIA for many years. The day I found out he was in the embassy was enough for me, i.e. enough to make this person believe that he's just a CIA asset, essentially. Yeah. Now then, we also discussed this cult called the Family, which we showed a photograph or a video of a child that looked remarkably like Julian Assange. And I suspect that was Julian Assange, and Julian Assange was part of this mind control cult. That's my personal belief. Now this viewer says, hi Richard, after watching your film, I decided to do a bit of research on Julian myself. On the subject of mind control, I found out that a member of the family cult group called Marian Villemek was the owner/manager of New Haven Hospital in a place called Kew. The hospital was a psychiatric hospital where they used LSD and electroshock treatment, but also the cult leader Hamilton Byrne was the administrator of the hospital. Please have a look at page 7 of the attached document. And then this viewer's then sent me a PDF of a document entitled Sex Abuse in Victorian Catholicism, the Ronald Conway Connection. And on page 7, we have the New Haven Psychiatric Hospital, which was situated at 86 Normanby Road, Kew in Melbourne's Inner East. In the late 1960s and during the 1970s, New Haven Hospital was owned and managed by Marian Villemek, a member of a New Age sect called the Santaniquetan Park Association, also known as the Family. A leader of the sect, Anne Hamilton Byrne, was also an administrator at the New Haven Conway. So that's evidence that these people who were running the cult were also involved in mind control techniques at another establishment, if these documents are correct. Now, for me, this was the best email that a viewer sent. Very perceptive, in my opinion. I'm going to read most of it because I think this is very important. So, this viewer is looking at Julian Assange's criminal record in the 1990s of his computer hacking and asking the question, does it seem plausible what happened to him after he was arrested? Okay, so let me just read this. He states, regarding the timeline of Assange's activities in the 90s as reported on his wiki page. To summarise, September 1991, discovered hacking into a Canadian telecom network. October 91, raided and presumably arrested for the same. 1993, giving technical advice to VP Child Exploitation Unit and assisted with prosecutions. 1993, involved in starting public ISP in Australia. 1994, began programming. 1994, charged with those 1991 crimes, 31 counts of hacking and related crimes. 1995, authored or co-authored a TCP port scanner. 1996, authors patches to PostgreSQL. 1996, authors Usenet caching software. 1996, pleads guilty to 25 of the 1994 charges, 6 of them dropped, 2,100 Australian dollars reparations. 1997, authored Rubber Hose Deniable Encryption System. Does this timeline make any sense, the viewer states? I think it does in one way, which is that if the dates and claims are accurate, it indicates that he was an asset from the moment he was arrested in 1991, if not before then. Think about it. The dude's arrested in 91 at the tender age of 17. It takes them 3 full years to bring charges. But meanwhile, he's assisting the Victoria Police. And with what? Child exploitation. Ring any bells? WikiLeaks? Pizzagate, anyone? Oh, and he finds time to get involved in starting one of the first public ISPs in Australia. That's an internet service provider. But alas, according to that published timeline, none of that assistance or involvement is enough to keep them from charging him for those 1991 crimes. True, it takes them until 1994 to do so, but charge him they do, if we're to believe what's written on that page. Still, none of this dampens his spirits or slows him down, apparently because even with 31 charges of hacking and related crimes hanging over his teenage head, Julian finds himself to author or co-author a TCP port scanner. Unfortunately, after apparently letting the case flounder for another 2 years, they finally get a guilty plea out of him in 1996 on 25 of the 31 charges. Here, one is left to wonder whether that assistance really did pay off, because despite the severity of the charges, Julian walks away from it all with a piddling fine of 2,100 Australian dollars. Once again, at 17, Assange would have been a juvenile at the time he committed these crimes. It does not normally take the justice system 3 full years to charge juveniles with crimes. Juvenile crime cases are in fact expedited in comparison to adults. There are less of them for one thing, and the law is more restrictive regarding possible penalties, etc. for another. If even a word of what's on that wiki page is true, and that is a really big if, then it would indicate to me that he was an asset at least from the moment of arrest and has apparently been one since. I see nothing to indicate otherwise. There is no way in hell that police would be allowing a teenage Uber hacker who's pled guilty to hacking into a major state-owned telecoms company to walk away with nothing but a fine. At the very least, there should have been included an injunction prohibiting him from using computers and so on. So this chap is convinced that Assange was recruited by authorities and he was working for them very, very early on as a teenager.
Well, I mean, this is the sort of thing we've seen, and I may have mentioned this before, but there are several other 9/11 researchers that have turned out to have criminal records, that we've ended up coming into contact with. So, again, the same old thing. When they've got something on you, they can manipulate you.
Right. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I stated in the interview was that there seemed to be a gap from about 1999 up to when he starts WikiLeaks in 2006. And some people have said, oh, well, if you work in the IT field, you're not necessarily working for companies, you're freelance, so you might not have it on a CV. But a few people have attempted to try and fill in this period. We've got one emailer sent me an article it's from the Melbourne University Mathematics and Statistics website, and it's an article, or it's a press release from the 13th of September 2004. I'll not read it all out, but what this is about is that the Mathematics and Statistics Society at Melbourne University were running a treasure hunt. So they'd buried $200 and they were putting out various clues. They wanted people to try and solve them, and they were using the internet to get people from all over the world to try and solve these clues to try and get this $200. And it states here that the Society's President and Vice President, Damjan Vukcevic and Julian Assange, respectively, say the mystery puzzle hunt is modelled on the famous MIT challenge. So Assange is connected with the Melbourne University's Mathematics and Statistics Society in 2004. Now, in the previous show, we stated that Assange wrote this rubber hose deniable encryption software in 1997, and I think Peter Zatko said that was at Melbourne University. So he's attached to Melbourne University in 1997, and then also in 2004 at the age of 33. So I take it from that he must have had more than one stint at university, and the interesting thing is that he's never graduated in anything. He hasn't got a degree. So he's associated with Melbourne University from 1997 up to 2004, 97, 98, 99, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 7 years, and he hasn't got a degree. Now that's anomalous, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, was he doing a PhD? Was he a failed...
Was he picking his arse?
Yeah.
Right, so, I'll maybe cut that out. Just gets on my nerves, like, you know, I get annoyed by it. Now, somebody else sent me an article which is attempting to fill in some gaps, which actually doesn't fill in any gaps, really. This is an article from the Sydney Morning Herald in May 2010. So this article is written just before the Ecuadorian embassy affair, nonsense, when he's supposedly leading some nomadic lifestyle. He's traveling around the world with his duffel bag and laptop. So I just want to read some of this out. It's the journalist asks him, does he have one base he'd call home? And he says, I have 4 bases where I would go if I was sick, which is how I think about where home is. So Assange mentions 4 bases but names only 2, the one in Iceland and another in Kenya, where he has spent a lot of time on and off in the past couple of years. So the Kroll report released on Wikileaks reportedly swung the Kenyan presidential election in 2007. So this is what we were stating in the previous interview, that he's been used for geopolitics and to influence certain things on the geopolitical scale within governments and elections and that kind of thing. And it states that when he's in the country, this is in Kenya, Assange lives in a compound in Nairobi with other foreigners, mainly members of NGOs such as Medicines Sans Frontières. So that's an NGO, and we know what NGOs are used for. They're kind of mini psyops, masquerading as help organisations, but actually they've got hidden agendas. So he's been sheltered by some NGO. Now this has to go down in history as the most loaded question by any journalist. Right? Just look. This is an example of the worst kind of question that you should ask as a journalist. This is actually in the Sydney Morning Herald. Right? This is what the journalists wrote. Did being arrested and later on finding himself in a courtroom push him into a completely different reality that he had never thought about, and eventually in a direction that eventually saw him start thinking along the lines of the website like WikiLeaks? That would take on the world. Talk about putting some words in someone's mouth. So he answers,
yes.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. That experience showed me how the justice system and bureaucracy worked and did not work. I'm not going to read all that, blah, 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 blah. Right, so it says here, he spent 4 years studying maths, mostly at Melbourne University, with stints at the Australian National University in Canberra, but never graduated. Disenchanted, he says, with how many of his fellow students were conducting research for the US defence system. Right, so his mates are working for the US defence, and he didn't graduate because he was miffed that they were working for US defence. It is just a load of bollocks, isn't it? Assange says he did a lot of soul searching before he finally quit his studies in 2007. He had already started working with other people on a model of WikiLeaks.
Well, if he did a lot of soul searching, it seems he didn't find one, so...
Correct. And just to mention that you said that they often use criminals to become shills in various organisations, whether it be 9/11 research or what have you. We had all of this debacle about these rape allegations in Sweden. So I don't suggest that he raped anyone, but what I would suggest is that possibly that was a situation set up, an entrapment situation, in order to attempt to get a rape allegation in order to further control him through blackmail.
I mean, what I was saying was, once they've got something on you, so you may not have actually been charged with anything, but they may have evidence that, you could be charged if they put that evidence, and sent it to the police or whoever, or even to another family member that would make your life, miserable. Mm-hmm. So you can manipulate people in many ways. Mm-hmm.
And this is what I've printed here is an extract from an article, I think, in Vice magazine, and it says, as the saga possibly comes to an end, Vice US spoke to Melbourne University's Jerry Collier, who taught Assange maths back in 2006. Right, so that's two years after that. He's being taught maths. So how long is he at the university without getting a qualification? Is there a world record for being an academic at a university without getting a qualification? Right. So seems to me then, if he's kind of been placed there to learn certain skills for US intelligence probably, but they don't really need him to qualify in anything because that's not his role. They've got this rogue role model that they want to create, so he doesn't need to get a degree.
In other words, he's got a job, so he doesn't need to get a degree to get a job.
Yeah, yeah.
He's already got a job.
Yeah, because most people, when they do go to university, the reason why they're going there is to get a qualification so that they can then get a job.
That's right.
But it seems that he already had a job. That's why he didn't need to qualify. Yeah. Okay. Here's a few general comments. One viewer says they recommend Dr. Steve Pieczenik on Assange and Snowden. Another viewer states, my role in Liverpool was as area manager of the Knowledge Quarter. This allowed me access to the universities of Liverpool, where I moved around with great ease. I was in one of Liverpool University's staff coffee bars. I was close to 2 university lecturers, one a professor, one a PhD. Their conversation was about the recent WikiLeaks, and they concluded that it was a CIA operation that allowed the CIA to have limited hangout whilst smearing the enemies of the US empire. This next viewer states, everyone knew about NSA databases and global information retrieval years before Julian Assange leaked it. So maybe it all has to do with destabilising foreign governments, if that come up again. This viewer states that there are 2 core functions of WikiLeaks. One, to get a head start on actual leaks. In other words, if you are a government employee or you've got access to a secret document, WikiLeaks is probably the first organisation you're going to send it to. So they know what's being leaked then by having this one organisation, so they can keep an eye on people who are leaking things. That's what he's saying. And 2, they have prevented someone outside their sphere of influence creating the #1 leaks site. Right, this viewer states that I think his ex-girlfriend, Assange's ex-girlfriend, possibly the one that accompanied him in Norwich, is worth a mention. Mentions here, 3rd paragraph. She is involved with another shill hacker, Laurie Love, ultimately designed to tighten up on the internet, in my opinion. So this next viewer just gives credence to John Young from the Cryptome website, stating that he named one of the people who was there at the Kennedy assassination, the Japanese intelligence agent, I think it was.
Yes.
I'm a bit surprised you didn't mention the George CFR Clooney connection, i.e. his wife is his lawyer. Did you know about that?
No, I didn't know about that.
George Clooney's wife has been Assange's lawyer. I didn't know that either. But Clooney is allegedly connected to the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes.
All right, so just the feedback asserted what the opinions that we put forward in the programme, I think, or
Yes, I think you got some that was backing up what you were saying, and obviously you got some extra information which filled in 1 or 2 gaps. I don't think there was anything major really which refuted the idea that Julian Assange is not really who he is purported to be, in terms of somebody that's purely interested in the truth and wanting to, basically disclose the dodgy dealings of governments and secret, part of those governments. He's not really interested in that.
Yeah.
He has another thing that interests him.
All right, Andrew. Well, thanks for that, and we're going to record another show, and so keep your tea towel shirt on there for the next show.
Well, I'll dry a few cups before we do the next recording.
All right, in the next part, I talk to Nick Kollerstrom about the protocols of Zion.